It looked like somebody was bent over and had their head in the window of the deer blind. It either heard me or smelt me, and he pulled his head out of the tent and stood straight up, and that shocked me. They don't make people that big.
The way it moved, almost as if it was gliding across the beach. I've never seen anything move like that in my life. They were screaming at each other in gibberish. It sounded like a language, and they were chuntering away back and forwards, back and forwards, back and forwards. I know what a bear looks like, and there is no way on this planet that what I saw were bears.
What are you reporting?
Jesus Christ, you better...
Sir?
Gio!
Hello?
Get somebody out here.
What's going on now, sir?
That son of a bitch is about 6'9", I don't know.
Do you see him now, sir?
Yes, I'm looking right at him.
Uh-oh.
This is Carter Bouchard, author of Sasquatch, Evidence of an Enigma, and you're listening to Sasquatch Chronicles.
Welcome to the show, everyone. Thanks for being here tonight. Got a great show planned for you tonight. We are welcoming back to the show Carter Bouchard. He's the author of Sasquatch, Evidence of an Enigma. As most of you know from episode 691 when I had him on the show, he is a BFRO investigator. And as him and I were talking, he was saying a lot of the reports get sanitized. Some things that happen just get removed from the report. And he was kind of burnt out on that. So he wrote this book, Sasquatch, Evidence of an Enigma. And if you go to rallycomnid.com, I'll include a link. You can get a copy of his book. And Carter has some really cool theories, a lot of on behavior and just kind of why Sasquatch do what they do. And he's first to tell you it's theories. He could be way off on it. But a lot of it's based on his own experience. And there's a lot of encounters in the book. So tonight we're going to further it's kind of a part two of our first part of our conversation. And I wanted to ask him about some of the more weird stuff that he heard from eyewitnesses that you may not have seen on BFRO. If you've had an encounter and you'd like to be on the show, shoot me an email. My email address is wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. And if you get a chance, check out sasquatchchronicles.com. You can become a member and get additional shows. Let's jump into it tonight. I want to welcome Carter to the show. Carter, thanks for coming on.
Well, thanks for having me back, Wes. Awesome show last time. I love speaking with you, man. You're intellectually stimulating. I like that.
I appreciate you saying that. I enjoyed talking with you as well. When we were talking about you were describing your theory about them counting and how the wood knock is them counting. And I realize it's a theory, and I appreciate you going, hey, it's a theory. I'm not an expert on this, but it was when you said that on the last show, kind of a light bulb went off. And I was kind of like, you know what? He might actually be right about that. And I really hope people go out and get the book. I know I've already said it, but Sasquatch, Evidence of an Enigma, by Carter Bouchard, rallycomnid.com. Get yourself a copy. A lot of cool encounters, a lot of cool theories. Carter, when I very first started this show, I talked to a lot of eyewitnesses, obviously, around the United States, Canada. And one of the things that came up as I was talking to eyewitnesses is appearance. Sometimes I would talk, I'll give you an example. In the Pacific Northwest, a lot of times people run into these sayings and they'll say, oh, it looked like an ape. It had a man's nose, but for the most part, I ran into an ape. And then when you get down south, you'll find that a lot of people will say, it looked very chimp-like. still a human nose, but kind of had a chimp appearance. And then the farther east you go, people would say, no, 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 no. What I ran into was very human-like. And I'm kind of curious, out of all the different reports that you took, did you notice that? Did you notice this kind of a range of appearance with these creatures?
Well, in Missouri, because I cover Arkansas, Missouri, Kansas, and Oklahoma, 4-state area. So for Missouri, it is mostly 7 to 8 foot tall. You might get an 8 to 9 foot tall, but they look human. And what I've perceived over talking to hundreds of people is that when they say ape, it's just the general shape, because sometimes they don't even see the face and they can't really delineate between, is that an ape or is that a human? But the people here in Missouri that have had the face-to-face encounters, I'd say 90-95% say it was human. It had black or dark gray or very, very tan, leathery looking skin, but it was a dude. It was Caucasian. It wasn't the prototypical thing like you hear. And I'd say that's 95% of the ones that have not gone into shock and not looked away or ran away. And they're looking and they're going, that's a dude. That's a man. I mean, that's it's just pure and simple. That's what they're seeing. My witnesses down in Arkansas do get into a little bit more shorter stature, the Legend of Boggy Creek, Falk Monster, all that kind of stuff. But they seem to be a little bit shorter and a little bit leaner. They're not the prototypical 9 foot tall, 8 to 1,000 pounds. They're 6.5, 7 foot, and just a leaner. They're very, very strong, but they tend to portray them as slightly chimpish or orangutan-ish in the face, and you get more of an orange type color. That's predominantly the ones that have had the face-to-faces down in there. Oklahoma, it's pretty much the same as Missouri. Kansas, it is about the same really as Missouri. They're tall and Caucasian looking. I get a few apes, but really it's more people that have seen them from afar and have ran, and they say it looked like a gorilla. Well, they weren't standing 50 feet away. They were standing 300 feet away. So of course, anything that's standing 300 feet away or more is going to look like a gorilla in its shape. But as you get closer, those features, get very finite, and it's just hard to, once you see it, and these people have told me these things, it is what it is. It looked too human. And hunters have had it in their gun sights and will say, I could have taken a shot. I couldn't do it. It's a human. It's a guy. It's a dude. I couldn't have done it.
Yeah, and I've heard that a lot from a lot of different eyewitnesses too, as well. And a lot of these different researchers, they'll go, "Oh, it was type 1, type 2, type 3, type," and then at the end of the day, no one knows.
Nobody knows.
And there could be 100 different types of these things. There could be one different type of these things. Let me ask you, as you were interviewing eyewitnesses and you were coming across these different appearances, mainly, as you mentioned, they looked more human-like, but some of the different other appearances, did you notice a different behavior depending on appearance? Like, if someone said, it looked more chimp-like, and as you're listening to the encounter, it sounded like a way more aggressive encounter, as opposed to someone saying it looked like a human, and maybe it wasn't quite as aggressive. Did you notice any sort of behaviors based on appearance?
Yeah, and it some of it is the stature. It would appear, and that the shorter, leaner are more hostile and aggressive. And I'm not sure if that's necessary because of their lack of stature, as far as maybe with other Squatches in the same area. And I kind of liken it to the short man syndrome, where you got a guy that's 5'5", no offense, gentlemen, but 5'5" has got a big monster truck he drives. You got to have a step ladder to get in it. So your maybe making up for what you lack in stature and size by being overtly aggressive or aggressive acting. Uh, you know, I've I've had a very aggressive behavior aimed at me, but it was night and I could not see what the size of the creature was. But when I get aggressive behavior, it's to me it's out of the norm. I understand the bluff charging and stuff of that nature, and screaming and yelling, trying to run you out of the area. If you stand your ground and don't leave, that all stops or it changes or subsides greatly. So I'm finding when I talk to the people, we have the shorter stature. They seem to me more hostile for whatever reason and aggressive. And I hear the same thing of the skunk ape in Florida. I have not experienced it, but they seem to be of a more aggressive ilk. And that could be an environmental thing. It could be I have to be this way because what I'm left to eat, what I have to hunt, the way I have to hunt, the people I have to deal with. It could be an environmental thing and not necessarily. Well, I guess it becomes a personality trait, but it may be more of an affectation of the area that they're in versus that's how they really are. That I can't tell you, and that I just don't know. But
yeah, interesting point you bring up though about the compensation. As you go down south, I've heard a lot of encounters, like in Texas, for example, and they'll say it looked more like a chimpanzee, and they'll describe it being 7, maybe 8 feet tall. You don't quite get the monster size like you do in Washington, for example, but they are 1,000 times more aggressive, or they appear to be more aggressive down there. And I often wonder if it's resources or I don't necessarily believe in evolution, but I believe it's called adaptation. There's
Yes.
an adaptation theory where it would make sense that something in Washington would be bigger because they have more room to run around. There's more food. Then there would be, let's say, Texas is a bad example, but you know what I mean. In other areas where there's not necessarily a lot of room to run around in. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think let's just take because I'm from Texas, so and it's a lot of wide open areas, except for the East Texas. It's wide open. You've got a lot of ground to cover. You probably have a lot of territory that you consider yours, and so you may have to compete for food and resources with the other Sasquatch that are in the area because it's just so wide and spread out. And let's say the Pacific Northwest, where they have had centuries of, I won't say evolving, but centuries of living virtually predator free. They do nothing, so they can grow to massive sizes. They've not had to fight for anything, fear nothing, and they've been able to expand their size just because of the protection. They're in a cool, moist rainforest type area that they've lived in for who knows how many thousands of years. And down in Texas, it's kind of wide open. You got to fight for everything. Although you've got you have food source, I think it's a little bit more scarce. So that could create an air of invincibility. Let's say Pacific Northwest, because I don't have to do much. I'm the king of the jungle here. And the little shorter guys down in Texas, I've got to fight for everything I can get because there's it's wide open spaces. It's it's 600 miles from Dallas to El Paso. You're still in Texas. That's how bad it is. So and there's not a lot there of mountainous region. It's a different terrain. So I think the area does dictate your personality and your body type and your depending on what part of the country, Northwest, Northeast, Montana, Florida, swamps, Louisiana. I think it's just as the people are different, so are the Sasquatch to a large degree, because if they've made that their home, your environment is going to shape you to a degree over generations and generations. That's just a theory, but I believe it kind of holds a little bit of water.
Yeah, and I would agree with you on that. when people talk about it looking very human-like, I'll give you an example. There's times where I'll ask people, compared to the Patterson Gimlin film, how would you compare it to what you ran into? And most of the time, that's not what people see. Most of the time, Patty is not what people see. When you first started getting these reports and they would say it looked like a human in the face, did that throw you off? I mean, were you sitting there thinking, what in the world are we dealing with here?
Well, it didn't really throw me off because I've already, in my head, we are dealing with, something that looks human, but most of the people here do not describe a patty-like look where the entire face is hair and you've got hair right up to the under the eyes and on the forehead, and you've got you know what patty looks like. No one describes that. It's like bare skin, hairless, hair free, hands have no hair, palms are not hair covered. So by and large, it is night and day from Patterson Gimlin to what is seen here in other areas of the country. I have not had more than 2 or 3 that said it looked just like that. And I do think that they are saying it because of the general shape. And sometimes they're not even really wanting to relive it. They're talking to me because they want to get it off their chest, but at the same time, they're in a hurry because talking about it freaks them out. So they kind of rush through it sometimes. But mostly here, it is smooth and Caucasian-like features. Some have the broad nose, but we don't get the hair covered stuff here. I just have not taken that many reports where they said it was covered in hair. A few, but not many. Out of 200 witnesses, I'd say, less than 5%.
I want to come back to this and some of your theories too as well. One of the questions you and I were talking before we started recording, and I was asking you, have you ever had an eyewitness come forward and they share like a bizarre encounter, or it could be Sasquatch related or not Sasquatch related. This dog man seems to be running around, and people do run into them. And I to this day I don't have a clue. I can't pinpoint exactly what the dog man is. You had mentioned this white Bigfoot. Do you mind telling us about that?
Yeah, I took a report and it was published. Of course, the dog man's not in there, but he added it as an afterthought because we were talking afterwards. So he had taken his girlfriend out to an area. There's a conservation area here in Missouri. It's called Amarugia. It's an area that people just go hang out and take walks and stuff. It's not really big. But he had seen, a white Sasquatch, and it was a very good report. He saw it, him and his girlfriend, and they, got their butts out of there. But a year or two before that, he had been out there with a couple of buddies, and they saw what he could only describe as Anubis from the Brendan Fraser movie, The Mummy. I mean, it was just, he said this thing was 8 foot tall. Its shoulders almost looked like it was comical, like it was they were so straight across. There wasn't like a lot of musculature and definition. It was just like it was a straight line across almost. With just very little definition, and it got to the shoulder and down to the arm. And the funny thing he told me was, he said, and the weird thing is that it had spikes on the back of its leg, on the calves. I said, spikes? I said, do you mean maybe the legs were bent backwards, as in a dog's leg? And he goes, oh my God, that's it. God, what did I think of that? So he's telling me this, and I'm describing his creature for him, but I'm describing, he was saying it had these weird spikes on the back of its calf, but what it was a dog leg. And he said, oh my God, I did see it. So there's a lot of Native American folklore regarding the dog man down there, and that's only about 60, 70 miles from my home here in Liberty. And it's common knowledge down there. And there's even a band called, this creature is known down there by the Amarugia Ridge Runner. That's what they have called, not Sasquatch, but this creature that is, for all intents and purposes, a dog man. Long snout, big Doberman-like ears that stick straight up. But it's common knowledge down there. And a few people have seen it. They'll talk about it in their small circle, but they don't talk about it outside the circle because you'll be crazy. You can see a Sasquatch, that's okay. If you see a dog man, well, nah, you're crazy. But that's the first time in 11 years of interviewing witnesses I've ever come up with a dogman report out of nowhere. And what baffles me is that if they are around and sometimes the sounds and noises and calls I hear at night, and I can't pinpoint them as to what they are, maybe some of those, who knows what they are. Some things are really out of place when you hear them. And so then I'm starting to think, well, am I only looking for one thing? Am I so focused on one thing I don't even see the other if I was to see it? I know that's not true. But that was the first time, and he was just as sincere. He's a military guy. He's retired military. He's had done 3 tours, I think, over in Afghanistan. So he's not somebody I would take lightly. And all his other report was very, very factual and precise, as a military person would be. So, and he went into great detail. Of course, I didn't mention that in the BFRO report. It would never make it anyway. It just wouldn't be there. But this happens to me often, is when I'm interviewing a witness and they tell me this fantastic encounter they had with a Sasquatch, and he goes, well, now let me tell you something else. And it's always after that, it's just like, okay, here comes the good stuff. Not that I haven't heard the other stuff before, but then they'll tell me something else with lights, orbs, mind speak, a black force just coming at them, and it seems to be like an alive type something coming at them at night, and it's not a squatch, it's just a black force, menacing. It's almost menacing. So you hear a lot of stuff, and these people, thank God they're telling me stuff, because they don't have anywhere to go, and BFRO or pretty much any other place is just going to discard it, but BFRO has their criteria, and so they're not going to report this other stuff anyway. But it's just fascinating that the sincerity is just, it's dripping with sincerity. I can't put it any other way. I don't know why that came to mind, but it's just, when you're talking to them, you just know they're feeling so relieved to get this off their chest. And you don't think I'm weird, do you? I said, no, I'm the weird one. I'm here investigating, stuff that doesn't exist. So I'm the weird guy. So
Yeah.
let's tell me what you got.
Yeah, no, and I'm glad that you do that, because you're right. A lot of people pass these people off, and the dogman never made sense to me. Let me ask you, because I want to get into some of the weird stuff, but I want to ask your opinion. What's your take on that dogman? I know you've taken one report. I'm sure you've looked into many reports of it. Do you think it's a biological being running around, or do you think it's more of a paranormal thing people are seeing? I'm at a loss as far as what this thing is people are seeing.
Well, I'm of the opinion, as in a Sasquatch, it's a biological entity. It is at least biological, and I think the dogman, mothman, perhaps. And I'll preface all of this by saying, if none of these are mistaken anomalies, like you saw a wandering egret or heron that wandered away from a pond and it flew across the street light at night, and you saw it looked like a dog. You know what I mean? If you can take out all the potential mistakes, and when you're talking to somebody, they say, I know what I saw. I know what I didn't see. I know what I saw. And that's all I need, with rare exception. There are, some people that do want to yank your chain, but I think they are biological in nature, at least, with a possible ability that we just don't understand to come and go from possibly another dimension. I mean, there's no other way to put it, When people tell you that over and over, it slipped behind a curtain. I had a cop tell me that. It walked behind a tree and it did not come out the other side, and it was way too big for the size of the tree, so it should have walked over to the other side. Even if it walked behind the tree and took a straight left and walked with that tree blocking the tree could not hide that creature. And so when you hear these things, you go, okay, well, either they can bend light, they have something in their hair follicles that gives them the ability to do this, or they can jump dimensions, which is all far-fetched and space cowboy type stuff, but we don't know. There's no expert. I don't know everything. When you start hearing it so many times, you have to go, I gotta look into this, or I gotta at least consider it, because I can't discard it. I can't. I'm not being truthful to myself or to the witnesses. Let me look into that. But they're seeing something. It's walking. It's crunching sticks. It's breaking through trees. That's a biological entity, unless they can throw and mimic sound, so that it sounds like they're doing that, but they're really not doing that. Ron Moorhead went through that in the Sierra, his camps there in Sierra, where they destroyed his camp. They were overturning pots, pans, fire, big metal garbage cans they stored their food and the firewood in, and they were going, oh my God, we got to clean this up in the morning. They walk out in the morning, nothing was touched. They imposed that sound and they heard it. And it sounded, for all intents and purposes, like they were destroying the camp. And they went out there, there was nothing. So you have to consider that is a possibility. And coming from Ron Moorhead, who's probably more esteemed than most people out there, you got to take it for what it is. Then you got to figure out what it was, But people tell you that stuff. They are biological, have a biological footprint here on the planet. And if they have other skill sets, I can't ignore them. You can't ignore them. Nobody can. You can ignore them if you want to, but to get to the bottom of everything, we have to listen to the people. We have to do that. And if this stuff turns out, well, that theory wasn't good, we'll just throw it out and you move on. You don't have to hang your hat on it, but you got to put it in your pipe and smoke it. You got to at least, consider it. It's just, I can't say it any other way. I'm like a broken record.
No, I don't think you are at all, and I agree. And you're right. Ron's probably one of my most favorite people in the Bigfoot world, because he's such a nice guy, he's sincere, and he has a lot of weird things that happen to him up at that camp. Before we get into some of the weird things, you mentioned this guy saw the Anubis. Can you tell me what appeared to be Anubis? Can you tell me about his Sasquatch encounter? What was he doing? And he saw this white creature. Did he describe what he saw? Can you kind of go into that encounter?
Yeah, he had gone to this area. Now, there's part of the area, although it's a conservation area, there's a big cornfield there. The guy, I think he alternates corn and soybean. And so they went on the other side where hardly anybody goes, because it's cut off. We had the floods here in 1993, and it wiped out the bridge. So for a long time now, people have been going the long way because they never repaired the bridge. So it's kind of an isolated area that you get off a main street. I can't remember the street. It's a numbered street. But when you get down there, you get down to it's the Grand River. So the Grand River, and there's a corn and soybean field, probably 100 yards away from the river, and the guy still farms it. Well, it had all been cut down. It was October, so everything had been, gotten for the season. And so he and his girlfriend went out there to try out. They got some new night vision goggles. They weren't looking for anything. They just wanted to try out the new goggles. It was a nice, clear, pretty night with a little moonlight. They just went out there to try out the new, I can't remember if they were goggles or if they were binoculars, but night vision binoculars. And they pulled up, and she was getting stuff out, and she was starting to spray her skin for insects and stuff like that. Still got a few bugs around October. And he was just scanning this field, and kind of quickly, because he was waiting for her. So he was just kind of doing a quick scan, and he saw something, blew it off, and then he went, well, what was that? And he went back, and it was a Sasquatch, and it was walking at them, toward them. But it was about 100 yards away. So he's looking through his binoculars. He sees this white Sasquatch. He tells his girlfriend, "You're not going to believe this is a Sasquatch out there." And she runs, jumps into the car, and closes the trunk on top of her. She's freaked out. And he's kind of freaked out too. So, and he described it as minimum 7 foot, 8 foot tall. They went back out there the next day and looked for prints, didn't find anything. They looked, and that's where he got the size, was this, measuring it against the trees from about where he thought he saw it. So it was real quick. It lasted 5-6 seconds, and it's a funny story because she jumped in the trunk and locked herself in the trunk, and he had to pop the trunk and get her out of there and put her in the car. But where the Anubis was seen was about 2 miles from that, across the Grand River on the other side of the bridge that had been washed out. And that was with him and three or four other buddies. I don't remember the number. But it was in the same general area. It was still in a cropped area that backs to a really thick tree line. And they kind of follow the Grand River around there, kind of meanders around. So that's where he saw the Anubis. But the Sasquatch thing was great. And actually, he had 2 sightings. And I took another report out of that area that had 2 sightings, and one individual with 2 sightings. Kind of crazy. And of course, the old axiom, well, if they've seen Sasquatch 2, 3, 4 times, they're full of crap. Well, that's not necessarily the case. Some people are just in the right place in the right time. I think some people are magnets for that kind of thing. They're just in the right area, and their minds and their eyes are open to the possibilities, and they have encounters. So
fascinating account. I don't blame her for jumping in the trunk and locking herself in. I probably would have too. I've been like, let's get the hell out of here,
Yeah.
One of the questions I wanted to ask you regarding this mind speak. Now, back prior to when I first started the show, I would bypass that because in my mind, I would think in a lot of demonic. What's strange, Carter, is in a lot of demonic encounters, you'll hear about mind speak. You'll hear about a lot of eyewitnesses talking about that. The weird thing is, in a lot of these alien encounters or alien abduction encounters, you'll also hear about mind speak. And back when I first started, I thought, well, we're chasing an ape. And my opinion has obviously changed since then. And I had Les Stroud on the show, Survivor Man, and he talked about mind speak. Do you have any accounts regarding mind speak? And we can kind of talk about those. And I'm kind of curious on your take on it.
Yeah, I have several versions of that, and then one of them is with one of my habituation people. And this is where I kind of think there might be a faction or two, maybe a couple of different clans of Squatch on their property. And this is where we're getting into the personality and stuff like that. The Sasquatch that I have experienced with them, where we sit on the front porch and we just kind of listen to each other, and I'll do a howl and they'll return my howl. I'll do a knock, they return my knock, and they do one and they return their knock. It's just a fascinating thing. Well, there are other Squatches, and they think there is a different clan or maybe a rogue Sasquatch that goes and bangs on their daughters by her side of the house, where the daughter's on one wing of the house, they're on the other. It goes and bangs on the house. Of course, freaks the daughter out. She's a high school student, and she's she believes, but this is more overt and aggressive type stuff that they're not used to. And so one night this happened, and the husband was away. It was just the mother and the daughter in the house, and the banging started, and clear as a bell, and she just told me this here about 2 weeks ago, she heard, "It's okay, we're here," in her head. And she took it to mean that they will take care of the one who's banging, because they were screaming at each other in the house. Oh my God, what's going on? And the creature was banging on the back side of the house, the left side and the left rear of the house. And so, and she heard it in her head, and it's happened several times. A couple of times it's happened where nothing has occurred, but she will hear, "We're here." Just, that's it. We're here. So whether it's an invitation, but it's in her head. Now she's devoutly religious, and she is aware and has experienced demonic evil type situations, and she knows that, and they pray about it, and they take care of business that way. But they feel like there is a protective group, or just a few, usually the ones that we're dealing with. There's 3 of them across the road where we sit on the porch. This sounds like I'm just going to Walmart and getting a haircut and going to get some Taco Bell and coming home. Well, I was sitting on the porch playing with the Sasquatch. It sounds so bizarre, but it's a real thing, and I'm very privileged to have the ability to go immerse myself pretty much whenever I want, you know. But she feels like there might be a bad guy in the group, or several, and that when that banging started, and whatever was out there sensed their terror at the very moment, because they didn't know what to do, and the man of the house was gone, and of course they can all shoot guns, every one of them, but we are here, it's okay. That is like, that's off the charts, but it's in her head, and she's hearing it, and it's like someone's talking to you like through headphones. She said it's just like I got headphones on, and they're telling me it's okay, or we're here. And what do you do with that? How do I say you're nuts? 'Cause you're not. I mean, they're hearing it, and they want nothing, and she's not a loony bin. What I mean? These people.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
And I've heard it several times. There was a couple of reports that didn't make it into my book just because there just wasn't enough room, and I was going to use it, but it wasn't my report, and I couldn't get a hold of the witness to verify some things, so I just left it out. He had an event when he was taking out the trash. This was in Florida, and he was taking out the trash, and they had something that had been going through their garbage, age-old story. Could have been bears, might have been Squatch, who knows. And so he had to weight down the trash cans with cinder blocks to keep whatever was getting in the cinder block, whatever was getting in the trash, keeping out of there. And so one night he went out before school. It was probably like 6 a.m. I would say night, but between 5:30 and 6 to go before he caught the bus to school. His chore was to go out and take the trash out to the front so the garbage guys can go by and get it. And he went out there, and the garbage can, when he turned around, was walking back to the house, the garbage can lid just came off, and it had the cinder block on it. And he heard a voice, "We are not of this earth. Go home." He was about 12, 13 years old. Now, where does a kid come up with that? Or where does a kid come up with, "Hey, I'm going to fake this"? When I talked to the guy, I did talk to him. He's a grown man. I was like 35 or so. I can't remember. He lives up in Massachusetts somewhere now. He said it was clear as a bell. I relive it almost every day in my head. And I will never, ever forget it. I will never, ever say it was anything other than what it was. It was a voice telling me, "We are not of this earth. Go home." I think what it was telling me, his synopsis of what it was telling him was, go home, like go back in the house, But it was telling him, because he thinks that the thing thought he saw it and was looking at him. And he thought, as he thought about it later, he's reflecting, I'm thinking, okay, he's trying to calm me down because I'm a 12-year-old kid. I'm going to freak out and go run and, screaming. And it wasn't like that at all. But that's just two of I've probably got a half a dozen of those where people have heard something talk to them, and they're not making it, I mean, They could be, I guess, but I don't think so.
Yeah,
So.
and I don't think so either. And it's bizarre. I remember Les Stroud told me, what did it tell him? If you want to see us, stay the night. But he didn't stay the night. What do you make
A big
of that?
weenie.
Yeah, I would have. Yeah,
Yeah, I'm kidding.
Yeah, I know you are. What do you make of that, though? I mean, what is your take on that? I know it's easy to go to the religious side and go, it's demonic. I mean, that's my knee jerk reaction, but that's years of religion in my head. And I just don't know what to make of that. It throws me when people say that. And I've had hunters on the show tell me the same thing. They go, it's kind of in the back of your head and you just kind of hear a weird voice. What's your gut tell you that is? I mean, do you think it's just an ability that they have that we don't have? Do you think it's something more sinister? And I realize you're theorizing. I'm just curious on your opinion.
Yeah. Well, the theory I'm hanging my hat on right now is that at the very least, it's a form of hypnosis. So, maybe it is done with infrasound. And again, like you said, I'm theorizing. It's conjecture, but you have to okay, if this is really happening, how could it be happening? Other than electronics. So I think it's possibly a form of hypnosis where they can put you out, whether it's infrasound or zapping or whatever you want to call it. And they are projecting their thought. There are humans that can do that. There are, humans that can project thought. And, look at the remote viewers. The remote viewers can see a room in Russia from the United States. So, and that's been proven to be a real thing with the military.
Yeah.
And so if that can happen, why can't a form of hypnosis or infrasound that momentarily disables you or puts you into a semi-trance state so that you're still physically functioning if you're walking or standing or whatever you're doing, and you're hearing this? I can't say that doesn't happen, because it is not even remotely outside the realm of possibility. It's probably very well within the realm of possibility because we don't know what they can do. You hear about the zapping, and I've been zapped, and my squatching buddy's been zapped. I've seen guys drop to their knees with the zapping, and with the infrasound.
Well,
So
explain that to someone who doesn't know zapping, or I'm sure most of my audience does, but for someone listening who has no idea what you're talking about, tell us what happened. Kind of explain the whole zapping experience.
Zapping, and we call it zapping, and what we mean by it most of the time is infrasound, and that they can manipulate the sound waves and the air waves and hit you above or below the human range of hearing and disorient you. And it's shown that infrasound, which is some of the things they use to disperse the crowds over, in Europe, especially the big sound cannons, it tears your guts up. You're in a lot of pain. You're disoriented. You're hallucinating because it is messing with your brain waves and your internal organs because of the frequency. And I've seen a guy drop to his knees. We were walking along, and you heard this. It's just like a real quick, short breath of air. And he just doubles over in pain and falls to his knees. I can't get up, guys. Something just got me. And it's on a recording. I did not hear it. I was further behind the group at the time, but everybody heard it that was standing there. And he fell down. He was physically unable to get up. And then when he did, he was kind of just woozy and groggy, like he'd been, hit in the, face by a prize fighter. He was just knocked loony. And so I have been in my sleeping bag, and I had to get out, and I couldn't. Not because I couldn't work the zipper, because I couldn't move my arms, and something had walked by my tent, and I heard the boom, 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 the heavy, heavy bipedal walking. And I said, oh, that reminds me, I got to get up and take a leak. So I'm getting up, I'm trying to get out of my bag. And I thought, well, maybe it was my partner. He was camped about, 25, 30 yards away. And I thought, well, he's getting up, and I was going to see him when I got out there. Well, I couldn't get up. I tried, and I was just going, why can't I get up? I wasn't really panicked. I was really kind of sedate, or I'm trying to think of the word. I was just very calm, but it's just like I was still frustrated because I couldn't get up. So the basic thing is, they use that in hunting. They use that in possibly in communication. Lions, tigers, elephants, giraffes, dolphins, whales, and many, many, many other animals in the animal kingdom use infrasound to communicate. They can communicate 5-10 miles away to another herd, to another creature. So it does exist, and you'd have to look into it. But so why could not these creatures, these beings, and they're not apes, they're beings, why can they not project a thought or a sentence to you, to talk to you, to calm you down? I mean, I just don't see why it's not possible. Can't tell you how it's done, but I'm kind of glancing over what many theories are that a lot of guys share. But that's it, kind of in a nutshell. I can't say they can't do that. You're not being truthful to yourself and witnesses and the people that are wanting to read and hear about this. You're not being truthful if you don't just consider it.
Yeah, and I appreciate you explaining that, Carter, the whole infrasound thing. I did an infrasound show, gosh, long time ago, and I thought about doing another one because I've learned a lot more about infrasound. But, when I was doing that show way back when, I was looking up history of infrasound, and, they even used it in the movies, and they got busted. I believe it was Disney that got busted because they would play certain frequencies, and the human body is so fragile. There's a fear frequency. They can change frequency to make you mad, disorient you, make you feel happy. And so I believe it's against the law now for them to do that, but they were using them in the movies, and it is a real thing. One thing that really frustrates me about this topic is a lot of times you'll talk to eyewitnesses. I'll give you an example. The Browns property here in Washington State, Sarah and John, and they've kind of left the whole Bigfoot world, and I don't blame them one bit for leaving, but Sarah had hours and hours and hours of recordings of these things talking, what appeared to be of them talking. And one thing that I noticed when I was on the property is early in the morning, it was a very animalistic type vocalization. Late in the evening, same thing. It was very animalistic. Middle of the day, you would hear Yahoo! And I mean, it didn't quite sound human. It sounded off, but it was more of it wasn't animalistic at all. And that's always kind of frustrated me because there's no other being on this planet that does that. You know what I mean?
They can talk to one another, and I think they can use our language, and if they want to, because like I said, I've got another habituation person who has them calling her by her husband's nickname for her that nobody else hears, and it's clear. So it's like, hey Schnookums. That's not what he says, but it's one of those little affectionate little nicknames you call your significant other, nobody else knows it, and if you say it out loud, you're going to sleep on the couch, that kind of deal. But it's they speak our language, or they are mimicking, but either or, if they can mimic the sound of the word, then they can pick up the rest of the language. And as if you're watching two guys from the Arab Emirates speaking, you don't know that language, but you can tell from the dialogue and the demeanor of the people if it's a friendly conversation, if it's a romantic conversation, if it's hostile. You can get an idea. And so, they can watch us and they know what we're saying, and they know generally, by the tone of the voice, what we mean when we're saying, if we're trying to project, anger, as though your mother always called you by your middle name, Wesley John Smith, I'm going to send you to your room. You're always going to, you can tell that's anger. Your mother never called you by your middle name unless she was ticked off, or your dad or whatever. I think they know our language. She heard in her head, it's okay, we're here. It wasn't in a grumbly Sasquatch voice. It was a soothing human tone. And that's the strange part, is that if they wanted to portray anger or fear or hostility, they could. This was something trying to calm her down.
Yeah, it's so strange.
Yeah, it blows you, because, and there have been some that have heard some other things that were hostile or angry or frustrated and maybe trying to run you off, and they were more in a deep, kind of garbled but still English of sorts. You understood what they were saying, although it was, like somebody was maybe trying the English language for the first time in that situation. But that stuff goes on, and they can talk to us in our language if they want to. I think they may not understand it, but they can mimic it.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I remember on the Browns property, she has many recordings of them going, Sarah, Sarah, Sarah.
Yeah.
And I thought, how do they know her name? And there was different ones. Sarah has like hours and hours and hours of recordings. And I even heard Sarah one time when I was out there, and I was like, I wonder how it knows her name. And I remember her husband came home one day, and he pulled up in the driveway, and he was coming around the back, and he goes, Sarah, Sarah. And it made me wonder if it was mimicking or... but you're right. They do. There's a lot of different accounts of them trying to speak. It's weird though. Like when you hear the Sierra sounds, it sounds like they're speaking, Sumerian's a dead language, but it sounds like they're speaking some ancient language. And why wouldn't they speak to Ron in English? And it's stuff like that throws me off. I'm not saying that they can't do any of this stuff. I believe that they can, but it's just weird because in some situations, like at the Browns, Sarah, Sarah, and then you hear the Sierra sounds, and it's like, rah, 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 it's just mumbling to them, and you're like, what in the world's going on here,
Well, my theory on that is, like at my habituation side, and the Browns, Sarah, it's a fixed commodity. It's the same people day after day after day, and so you get to know them, and whether you know that her name is Sarah, but they know that when he says Sarah, Sarah, she pops out of the house and comes running up and gives him a hug in the driveway. They go in and have dinner. So they know that she responds to that. Now, do I know that they know that that's her name, or that is what he calls her, or that is another word for woman or mother? That we don't know. But with Moorhead, you've got these creatures that had little, if any, contact with humans. I forget what he told me. Was it like 7 or 8 miles up the mountain once you got to the base of the mountain? And it was strictly by horseback and donkey to get your supplies up, because some of those trails were like, you just couldn't get up there without, the beast of burden getting it up there. So my point is, that's a totally isolated spot. And those creatures probably maybe had never been around a human, or maybe seen them but never got close to them. So suddenly they're speaking their samurai chatter because that's their language, and they couldn't relate like, hey, Ron, or any of the other people's names there. They couldn't relate to them because they didn't see them on a regular basis. You know what I mean? So it's just,
it's good point.
I would say that is, adaptation. I see you over and over, and your wife or girlfriend calls you honey, but your name is Wes. So which is it? Well, they might try both. At least they have something to go on, because you respond to either one. So, but these creatures are seeing these 4 or 5 guys, Al Berry and Ron and whoever else was up there, and they have nothing to base anything on. What are these upright, hairless Sasquatch doing up there wearing clothes? Who are these people, and what are they? And they're talking amongst themselves about them because they don't know what to do with them or about them. It's just a theory, but I'm just trying to think why, they would call out somebody's name in one event and then not in another.
Yeah, you're right. There's definitely a language, and I think there's a lot of mimicking that goes on too as well. Going back to the Sierra sounds with Ron Moorhead, The creatures would say something and he would mimic back what they were saying, and it was kind of this weird back and forth. But if you listen to the creatures talk to each other, there's one in particular. Actually, I'll play it here in a second. It sounds like the creature goes, aha, and then Ron goes, aha, back to it. And it almost sounds like the creature says, watch this, and he goes, aha, and then Ron mimics that back. And then shortly after that, it sounds like the creature says, why is he talking like that? In this weird cadence. So I think that there is a language. Actually, let's take a listen to it right now. It's so creepy. Obviously, I don't know what they're saying. That's just my interpretation of what was being said. But I almost think when they talk like that, it's kind of meant for them. It's not meant for us.
Yeah, it's code. It's their language. We have no idea what it is. And Scott Nelson has played it slow, and there is some definite linguistics and tics and isms, and that there is sentence making. It's not just boogity boogity. It is slow down, and there is inflection, and there's breath between. It is a spoken language, pure and simple. We just don't understand it, and like you said, it may be based on the Sumerian. A lot of people say it's the Chinaman chatter. And it may just be a combination of languages they've been exposed to, and they've come up with their own language, but I think they can still decipher, if not the absolute meaning, what a person has to have said to them to make them respond, and so they know to do that.
Yeah, this subject really is mind-blowing and frustrating. I think as humans, we love a good mystery, but we want to solve a good mystery. And it's so hard to solve what's going on with a lot of these encounters. The book again is called Sasquatch, Evidence of an Enigma, and go to relichominid.com. And I recommend to the audience, get yourself a copy. I'm enjoying reading it. Carter, when I talk to eyewitnesses, it's very exactly how you described it. They'll tell you their encounter, and then they'll say, oh, and by the way, I'm also seeing this. And what would always come up in the past were these weird balls of light flying around on people's property. I did a show, and I don't know if they're Foo Fighters, but the descriptions are close. I did a show about the Foo Fighters and kind of what the World War II pilots were seeing. But I've talked to probably more people who've seen these weird balls of light than have actually seen the creature. Do you have anything in the book related to balls of light? Or have you talked to eyewitnesses that have seen these weird balls of light on their property?
Yeah, I've got a couple of them. Of course, that kind of stuff you'll never see on the BFRO. They just don't do woo, as we say. It's just terrible, and it's not fair, and it's not right. The lights, and I thought more about this after I started hearing it. When people speak of ghosts and spirits manifesting themselves, they're especially if they're you got your night vision camera in a room and you see these little orbs running across, and then it's obviously it's got direction. It is going in a specific direction. It's not a bug. It's not dust. I mean, sometimes they are, but you can eliminate some of that. So let's just say you've got a good solid orb in a haunted house or a place that's known for haunted activity. And so it's determined that these orbs are spirits before they manifest, or it is the spirits after they have demanifested and gone back to the orb to go back to the spirit world. So, okay, apply this to the Sasquatch. People see orbs and lights. If they can dimension jump, if they can move the fabrics of time, however they do it, or however they make it appear they can do it, maybe this ball of light is them coming and going from one dimension to another. Yeah, I know this is real, space age Star Trek, and people are rolling their eye. But you have to consider that what makes sense. It's the Occam's razor thing. What makes sense, even though that explanation doesn't make sense. But in the scheme of this report or this event, well, what makes sense? Well, maybe if they can do this, who's to say these orbs are not them coming and going? You have to.
It's a fascinating
you have
theory.
To think. Yeah. I mean, it's a theory, and it's one I've just started working with because I'm starting to hear stuff because people are getting comfortable with me. And by the way, after your show, I had like 3 people call me and none of what they told me was, extraordinary or unusual, but they don't have anyone to talk to. Some of these people just want people to talk to when they're seeing and experiencing these things. So, but thanks to your show, I had people calling me from. I think I had a guy from Tennessee, I had a guy from Georgia, I had a guy from Arkansas that that heard about it and they wanted someone to talk to, and they called BFRO 4 or 5 times. Nobody calls them back, which is an unusual probably for any large group. But the orbs and the lights, and I'm just speaking of the smaller lights, that softball size or smaller type lights that people see. I can't discount that is a possibility. We can't say, hey, go down to the crime lab here in Kansas City. Well, we got a body of a Sasquatch down here. Go down there, take a look, see what you need, and get what you need, and we're all good. We don't have any of that. We have to theorize and hypothesize because we don't know anything. And, that's where all this goes when you start talking about the orbs and lights. It's like, well, that's only about the 30th time I've heard that. So you can't ignore it, after you hear it, you just can't. I mean, you can if you just want to fool yourself, but you can't ignore that.
Yeah.
It has to be something.
It is. Yeah. It's obviously something. And I like your theory. Yeah, it's so hard. The only thing I can come up with the orbs, I started really looking into it, and was the Foo Fighters, but they were different. They were in the air. They were flying around. And the pilots, the way they would describe the way they looked and what they would do was the way they looked in particular was very similar to what we see. They aren't flying around at 200 miles an hour like they were during World War II. But people are still seeing these weird lights. Have you ever had an encounter where someone saw the lights and Sasquatch at the same time?
No, it's either, I have heard of some, but personally, the witnesses I've spoken to, it is usually right before or right after. And they assumed that was them just going into another dimension or going somewhere. We didn't even get into, they didn't hypothesize at all about fairies, UFOs, anything, like that. They associated it with them coming and going from the place they saw them. I mean, that's, I can't say it any other way. They were just there, and then, it just kind of walked behind a tree or walked, into the cornfield, and there was a couple of lights, and it was gone. What do you make of that? Like I said, I really had, out of 200 plus witnesses, I probably have heard that at least 15 or 20% of the time. There's a mention of orbs, and they're like, they have shame on their face when they're starting to talk about it. Well, I know you really don't think I'm nuts. I said, no, I'm not. We just described an 8-foot tall being that is massive and doesn't exist, and you're going to tell me about an orb. I'm all ears. Let's go. And I don't know if we have time, but the counting, and this is why I think that there is another human element to the knocking and everything is they can count, and the orbs, and the counting is just a theory. But after your show, I probably had a half a dozen people going, oh my God, that makes so much sense. Again, it's theory, but it fits just like the orbs and like the mind speak. Some of the stuff it fits, and I don't think, if someone wants to think I'm crazy, go ahead. I'm not legally crazy. I'm still allowed to walk the streets and do stuff,
Yeah.
and go to the grocery store and interact with humans. I'm not nuts, Well,
I'm glad that you phrased it the way you did, because what would drive me nuts about some of these researchers is they'll discount everything. It's like, well, what is it you're chasing again? An 8-9 foot tall, 1,000-pound monkey in the woods, and you're calling these people crazy for seeing a ball of light? I mean, it blows my mind sometimes. It's like, do you actually hear yourself talking at times, or do you just, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's kind of hypocritical, to call yourself a researcher. And I'm not knocking. There's some great guys out there, of course, obviously.
Yeah, of course,
but there's some people that are just on the bandwagon. They're just like, I want to be somebody. I'm gonna say this. I'm gonna do. What's your logic in saying this, and what's your logic in discounting all of this other stuff? If you're just looking for a big, like you said, a big hairy ape in the woods, go for it. But you won't see the forest because of all the trees. You just won't get it. You have to, because you will, if you're doing this sincerely, you will experience some stuff that you go, okay, I gotta reconnoiter here and get my ducks in a row because my theories have just been shot down. So I got to figure this out. If you're being honest with yourself, you have to be honest with yourself. So
yeah, and yeah, I agree. You have to be very genuine and honest when looking for answers. And just because you can't explain something or don't have an answer for something doesn't mean it didn't happen. And I remember there was a lot of encounters. Not a lot. I won't say a lot. There was few encounters that I've taken where they'll say it vanished, but it was still there. There was a guy in Washington State I talked to a long time ago. He came back from the military. I'll give you the Cliff Notes version of what happened. And he ended up going out to stay in this cabin. And the reason why he went to this cabin is he had PTSD coming back from the war and didn't want to be around anyone. It was his form of healing. And he would say he ran into these monkeys, these apes out there, and they would always mess with him. He didn't have power. He didn't have running water. He would fish for his food every day. I mean, he was literally living out in the middle of nowhere. And he told me about several different encounters, and he goes, I'm going to tell you about the last encounter I had. And he starts talking about how he saw this one in a tree, and it was right above his cabin. He went out there, it was throwing rocks on his roof. And he went out there, and they made eye contact. This thing jumped out of the tree, and he said, Wes, when it hit the ground, it vanished, but it didn't really vanish. And I go, what do you mean when you say that? And he goes, it reminded me of pollution in the air. And I go, what do you mean pollution in the air? And he goes, you ever seen the Predator movie? And I go, yeah, I've seen the Predator movie. He goes, it was like that. You could still kind of see it moving past the bushes, but it really wasn't there. Have you looked into reports like that? And what's kind of your take on that?
Yeah, I have. In my research in the book, I had a report like that, and I think it made it into the book. And have you ever heard of this video YouTube? It's called Squatching with Gabby and Bob or something.
Yeah, Barb and Gabby. Yeah.
It's just like that. You see this disjointed, gelatinous shape of some kind moving through the forest. You've seen it, so you know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It looks like the Predator. Looks like Predator's little brother.
And it's nothing other than that's what it is. And they had seen something, I think, the day before, went back to show a friend and would try to recreate and see if they could see, branches broken or footprints or whatever. And that's when they caught this anomaly on their video. So, I talked to one gentleman. Him and his son, I think, were hunting, and they saw a Sasquatch walking across a plowed field headed for some woods, and they started to follow it, not to shoot it. They were just, oh my God, look at that, you see it. And they were walking, and the creature, they were kind of gaining on it, but they weren't chasing it. They were just walking faster than it was, even though it's got a 6-foot stride and we've got 3. So, but it was just kind of moseying. And they both stopped to look at it through their scopes. It walked behind a tree. It was kind of a shimmering thing, like the desert floor on 120-degree days. You know how the mirage type looks. You think seeing something. It shimmered, and when it came up from behind the tree, it shimmered for just a second, and then it was gone. They watched it, and they said it was kind of clear, but it was shimmering, and they said the reflection of water. It was just it was a weird mass, but it walked behind the tree. They saw it side view, and then it walked on the other side of the tree, and there was like a little shimmering, and then it disappeared. But they said they both saw it, and it was like, what was that? What could do that? And they were both astounded.
Yes.
That's the only report that I've taken, or at least the only witness I've spoken to who has shared that with me. And it was actually for the book, and I think I put it in the book. It's in the quantum chapter in my book. And Ron Moorhead was kind enough to do some commenting on some of my theories and stuff that he's quoted in his book. Quantum Bigfoot. So, but that stuff goes on. If you only hear it once, but you hear similar things from dozens of different people, not the same thing, but an oddity here, a different oddity there. You go, these people are nuts. They're seeing something. They're experiencing something. We just can't put our finger on it. But, it's there. It just fascinates. It keeps me up at night. I just,
Yeah, it's really fascinating, especially when you hear different things like that. And it makes me wonder if, that's why we can't catch up with these things, because of the weird stuff that goes on.
Yeah.
It's do you think it'll ever be proven? And if so, what do you think it would take to actually prove that these things are real?
Well, I firmly believe that the government knows everything about them, between the paper companies, the Forest Service, and the U.S. government. I think they already know a whole lot more than we do. I think they have a pretty good handle on it. It's going to take a DNA. The reason they're keeping these things secret, I cannot imagine that we're all big boys and girls. We can handle whatever it is. My God, we're in the middle of horrifying, disjointed, emotions in this country right now. We can handle this kind of stuff, and they've already admitted the UFOs. What is it you're keeping? I mean, what are you going to tell us? They're our superiors. We're related to them. We were cloned from them. They were cloned from. What are you going to tell us that we can't already see in our heads or experience? Star Trek something? What are you going to tell us that can freak us out? It's a power thing, and there might be something that we just can't put together right now. But I think they know what they are. But we're going to have to come at them with everything we have as researchers and come up with the DNA that can't be thrown under the table. And some of these reports, I think video, there are probably some really good videos out there already, and trail cam shots, which is not evidence, by the way, but it's it's evidence to me and you. Look what I got. I know I'm not crazy, but I think it's going to take a concentrated effort of pestering the government. Just stop jerking us around. Stop. Just tell us what it is. I mean, just get it over it, and let's get on to some of the real important stuff in the world. I mean, in the scheme of things, what a Sasquatch is, who they are, what they are, where they're from, is not going to be nearly as devastating as the government thinks or as people think.
Yeah.
It's just another creature that lives on the planet that we can't come to terms with yet for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And no bodies. Well, maybe they go somewhere else to die. There's enough stories of burials here that there's something to that. Autumn Williams has that book Enoch, where the guy talks about, the Sasquatch pulled up a tree, root ball and all, a huge tree, put a body of a deceased Squatch down in there and shoved the tree back down, stomped the earth, and the tree's growing healthy and alive, and you'd never know there's a Squatch buried under there. You hear little things like that. So, I think they die here, and just the theory of there's not going to be a body after a week in the wilderness is any creature. You don't find bear carcasses very often. Wolves, Sasquatch, there's certain alpha predators you just don't find them because they go somewhere when they're sick. They go somewhere to get better, or if they don't, they're dead and they're hidden. So you're not going to find them because they're already half buried anyway. We need to pester the government. And there's going to be somebody who's just tired of sitting on this and realize, in the scheme of things, why are we holding this from the people? Why can't we just get this over with and tell them what it is? A few people will be shocked and cry and scream and throw their arms up in the air, but then we'll get on to stuff that's really important.
Yeah, good point. I think it's going to take the government to come out and basically say, yeah, it's like with UFOs. 40 years ago, if you said you saw a UFO or you saw an alien, you were crazy. Today, it's not so crazy. It's like you said, they even come out and said, yeah, these things are flying around. We quote unquote don't know what they are. And, obviously they know what they're saying, but they're slowly coming out and saying, this is what, these are real. It seems to be an issue. I think your average person, though, most people don't pay attention to it. It amazes me. You think it'd be shocking news? Wow, the government, they released this footage of this fighter pilot that chased this UFO through the sky. He had no clue what it was. It was doing things on radar that was impossible. And it seems like most people kind of glaze over it, which blows my mind. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I really think that with the UFO thing, most people are like, yeah, okay, they're there. We've been talking about it for 60 years. I mean, they're there. They're probably from another planet, or or maybe they're ours. But either way, I think it's already ingrained in our psyche to the point that, we don't think that much of it because it's such an exposed thing that really doesn't exist. You hear it over and over, and whether you have a smoking gun or not, you're pretty certain you believe they exist, or now the government says they exist. It's going to be the same thing with Sasquatch. It's not going to be that big a revelation. It'll be to the people who aren't following it. Like we spent a weekend with some really lovely people down south, and they have no belief system one way or the other. They just well, if they do, they do. If they don't exist, they don't. It's interesting, but I don't dwell on it because it's just not an interest to them. And it's just like discovering another lizard or a skink or a toad in this Amazon jungle. Well, we discovered another toad that eats monkeys for breakfast. Whatever. Okay, that's interesting. That's cool. Okay, now what? So I mean, it just kind of comes and goes, and I think it's going to be the same with Sasquatch to a good portion of people that are interested in looking and reading on it, and they're not going to be shocked or appalled or even frightened. I think the government thinks they need to protect us. That's what they tell us, and I think it's a bunch of hooey. What are you protecting us from? You or the secret? Which is worse?
Yeah, I often think that we almost need protection from our own government. But I think that they are covering it up based on what these things are. It's just a theory I have, but who knows? It's a weird mystery, and hopefully one day we will solve it, because it gets weirder and weirder and weirder as you get into it. I love the book. I hope people go get it. Sasquatch: Evidence of an Enigma by Carter Bouchard, and go to relichominid.com. I'll have a link underneath this episode. Definitely get yourself a copy. I'm enjoying reading it. I could sit and talk to you all day, Carter. We didn't get into structures. We didn't get into a lot of things that are in the book. But I really appreciate you coming on. I appreciate you taking the time to come on and share some of your experiences and some of your investigations.
Thanks, Wes. I greatly enjoyed it. Almost any time, I could just talk on this forever, just as you could on your your interest. I mean, it's just where do you stop? When do you stop? It's just a fascinating thing. And I hope people do get a little insight and enlightenment from the book. And if nothing else, it may answer a couple questions. It'll probably create more, but it just makes you think. Get out of your little safe little area and just think. Nobody has to know. Just be our little secret that you're, reading the book and opening your mind a little bit. You don't have to, believe any of it, but you at least, put it on the plate, consider it,
I couldn't agree more. Thank you again, Carter.
You bet.
And that's it for tonight, everyone. Remember, if you've had an encounter, shoot me an email. My email address is wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. If you get a chance, check out sasquatchchronicles.com. You can become a member and get additional shows. Have a great weekend, everyone.
When the love's still low and you want it bad, the lights on with nose and hand up in the heart. The lights on, my wheels unturned to go alone. The lights on, baby, you should know that you're gone. bad.